And welcome back to the Canadian Ruck. This is Jamie Gray coming to you. Today we're going to be talking with Kingsley Jones. Kingsley's the head coach of Team Canada, the men's national side. We're going to get to his bio here in a few minutes. Before we get there, let's take a look at what's going on and find out ways that you can contact me. On Twitter, Canadian Ruck, Instagram, the Canadian Canadian_Ruck. I always mess that one up. I really screwed up my Instagram name, I think. It was tough, I guess, finding a simple name. Those underscores always screw me over. On Facebook, we're at The Canadian Ruck, and email, thecanadianruck@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out at any time, any questions or thoughts you have on the pod, or about guests, or if you have questions that you want me to ask the guests. As always, you can always watch on YouTube. You can always listen on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. And make sure when you're watching or listening that you follow and subscribe. That's great. Just want everybody to know, this is just it's been a fun little habit for me. I don't know if habit's the right word, but it's been a nice way to kind of deal with the COVID blues. I'm a teacher by trade. This is just something I do for fun. I don't get paid. Now, if there's some businesses out there that want to sponsor or do some advertising, I'm not going to turn you down. But this is just something that I thought would be really cool, really neat way to, I guess, bring some attention to Canadian rugby players, rugby coaches, different programs. And it's allowed me to interview and chat with some great athletes that have all turned out to be great people. And it's just been a pleasure chatting with all these people, and Kingsley definitely falls into that category. I know there's some racial issues that are happening right now down in the States surrounding the George Floyd murder by those police officers in Minneapolis. And we're not really going to touch on that today, but I'm going to have Doug Fraser on soon. And Doug and I will be talking about that on our pod, and in ways that, as Canadians or as white Canadians or as rugby players or rugby enthusiasts, ways that we can potentially help these situations and be anti-racist as opposed to not racist. So hopefully you'll take a listen to that as well. But before we get there, we got, as I said, Kingsley coming up. But we're going to take a look and see what's happening in the news right now. And of course, COVID's got everything shut down. But Rugby Canada has rolled out a platform as for some return to play guidelines, and I kind of went over that. And New Zealand Super Rugby is starting up on June 13th. That's only, as I record this, like 11 days away. We're gonna have some Super Rugby, which is amazing. So make sure you're out and cheering on our podcast alum, and Tyler Ardron and Sammy Kane and Lachlan Bozier, the Chiefs. It's great to see those guys back. But I guess some things that have popped up in the news over the last week. Last pod I mentioned that World Rugby had been approached about running a new World Cup in 2021, basically called the COVID Coronavirus World Cup. It was an interesting format with 16 teams taking part, but World Rugby reviewed it, and they promptly turned it down. So that's not on the go. Also, a few things that have been in the news is the trials, the law trials, the orange card law trials are World Rugby placed out 10 trials to kind of set in place to see how they can work while people are social distancing during rugby. So some of the things they've kind of come up with, there are 10 here. So one, free kick on scrum resets. So there's not going to be any scrum resets happening. If a scrum collapses, or typically in any fashion where a scrum would have to be replayed, the ref is going to offer a free kick. Number two, hooker has to use a break foot for scrum stability. I guess give it a little bit more balance. Again, awarding a free kick if that doesn't happen. Number three, no scrum option on penalties. I think you're probably getting where we're going with these scrum things, but no scrum option on penalties. All right, so they're removing that completely. 4, goal line dropout instead of a 5-meter scrum for in-goal knock-ons or if held up in goal. Again, so removing those additional scrums. I think if I read between the lines of Sir Bill Beaumont, these are things that I think he wants to try and keep in place even once COVID's taken care of, because speeding up the games as opposed to constantly having resetting scrums. I'm a fan of scrums. I love watching, 8-on-8 scrums happen, and but maybe this is the way to try and speed up the game a little bit, and maybe potentially remove a little bit of unnecessary collision. I'm not really sure. Option 5 is the introduction of an orange card for high tackle infringements. So maybe those ones where it's a high tackle, maybe you look at it like, that's more than a yellow, but is it enough to throw somebody out of the game? And so they're looking at implementing an orange card, kind of an in-between yellow/red. Number 6, removal of the choke tackles. This makes sense. Choke tackles shouldn't be allowed to happen anyway. 7, ruck duration dropped from 3 seconds to 5. Drop to 3 seconds from 5. All right, so just trying to speed up those mauls from getting stagnated. Number 8, no scrum option on the use it call from scrums, mauls, or rucks, just awarding free kicks instead. So if it's not being used, then it's going to be that scrum option's taken away. I like this one. I've never been a huge fan of mauls. I know they work very well, but to me, I've never been a big fan of them. But this one's new, where you can't join the maul once it has been formed, which is kind of interesting. So once that maul's going, if you're part of it, you're part of it. If you're not part of it, you got to stand back and watch. The infringement again would be a free kick. And number 10, only one forward movement at the maul. All right, so it can't be stopping and starting. You got to continue moving forward. Once it stops, then then you have to use it. So again, that would be awarded as a free kick. A couple other things kind of do with the Sanzar. It's looking like we all know the Sunwolves of Japan are out of the competition, and it's looking like the Jaguares out of Argentina will be leaving as well. Obviously, they're not going to be able to play in 2020 because they're the only team in Argentina. But there's a lot of reports coming out over the last couple of weeks that they will not be coming back next season as well. So there's a lot of issues as to what they will be doing. Who knows, maybe they'll join the MLR. Probably not, because that's such a long distance for them to travel. But I'm not really sure what they're going to be looking, but they'll be looking for some place to play. And even what could be even bigger news, and this has kind of come up yearly with the South African teams of Sanzar, is that they're always looking to see if they can go to England or to Scotland and Wales and play in Europe. Obviously, it makes sense time zone wise. Travel time, maybe it cuts down a little bit for sure. I guess the big thing is a better competition. Are they going to get better competition playing in Europe as they would playing against the New Zealand or the Australian team? So there's a lot of weight behind that. I do know that they'd signed a lucrative television contract along with New Zealand that I think it's 4 or 5 years in length. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that number of years, but they are locked into a contract with a television. So I'm not sure if this is newsworthy or not, but it's something that still keeps popping up. That brings us to our gray area today, and usually I have notes, but I'm going to kind of wing my gray area today, and it's on coaching philosophy, and I think it kind of makes sense because we have Kingsley coming up soon. But I've been coaching high school rugby for the last 13, 14 years, if not longer. I've coached provincially for a couple seasons, sort of, and I run a rookie rugby program. I've never coached professionally. I've never been paid to coach. And I know some people have, and I know some people haven't. But my philosophy for coaching in any sport, and I've coached hockey, I've coached AAA hockey, and Adam House hockey, coached soccer and basketball, a bit of everything. But in baseball, my philosophy has always been is that winning only matters if you get paid, right? And majority of athletes that play sports don't get paid. Majority of coaches that coach sports don't get paid. It is nice to be rewarded with that win to show what your hard work has gone into. But more often than not, there's almost 50% of the time there's a winner and a loser in a game. Ties rarely happen, especially in rugby. So if your only self-worth off of a match is if you win or lose, then there needs to be a little bit of refocus to happen. And don't get me wrong, I love winning. I'm one of those guys that I remember my stats from coaching and from playing and when we won and when we lost. It's just one of those things that kind of sticks in my mind. But it's not something, I guess, as I get older that I realized it shouldn't take precedence in how I approach the game. I guess as a teacher, I kind of liken it to, you have a kid who gets 95s all the time. or you have a kid who gets a 60 and works their tail off and does the processes, and by the end of the year they're up to a 70. Which kid has more of which kid is more of a success story for you? The kid who stays at 90 or 95 the whole way, or the kid that worked their tail off and went from a 60 to a 70? Right? So for me, it's the amount of work that those players put in. It's their willingness to be a team, to put their team first when it comes to the game and it comes to training. Their ability to show true character and grit with a willingness to try and be better players and try, just as importantly, be better people. And I think more often than not, when that happens, winning falls in line afterwards. But if your sole focus is on winning, you're missing a lot of the finer details of life. There's a great book called Coach, which is an amazing short, very, very short read by Michael. Of course, his last name's eluding me right now. And of course, I'm not in my office where my book is. I'm outside because it's beautiful. But it's the same thing. Like he says, he remembers playing competitive sports growing up, but he remembers more the camaraderie side, the coaches who taught life lessons as opposed to just winning and losing. And I think more and more as sports become individualized and parents are sometimes pushing, or coaches are feeding the ego that, yeah, you're going to go pro, you've got a shot to make the NHL or the MLR or Major League Baseball or what have you. It makes that focus become more singular in winning and I guess looking more at the individual as opposed to the team aspect. But some of the greatest teams I've ever been a part of are those where, maybe we didn't have a lot of skill, but we worked hard and we worked to improve every match. And lo and behold, we would constantly find ways to become better. And if you can find a group of guys or a group of girls that can buy into that philosophy that, at the end of the day, if we win or we lose, as long as we're improving, the wins will come eventually. I think that's really important. I think that's really commendable for athletes and coaches to kind of go through those processes. I know a lot of people are going to listen to this and shake their heads and say, "What? No, winning's more important." But more often than life, you lose than you win. So what are you teaching kids when you say winning's the only thing that matters? The process, the getting there, is to me more important. And I think sometimes that gets lost, especially in sports that involve, people under the age of like 18 or 19, like high school sports or, middle school or minor hockey. A lot of those kids don't play for life. If you want them to play for life, you teach them that it's about the sport and it's not about the winning and losing. I saw a lot of, in my time playing hockey and coaching sports, a lot of kids just burn out because, it's win or nothing. And then they lose their drive. They're not there from the camaraderie. They're not there for the friendships that are being made. So I think that can definitely impact young players. Saying that, Kingsley's in a different position than I am. I've never coached nationally. You have to understand, you got to pick your battles. Like sometimes, we need a win here. Or sometimes it's about the process as, okay, let's work on these fundamentals and prepare, over the next 2 or 3 games, get ready for this big game. Kingsley kind of speaks about that a little bit. Kingsley played professionally in Europe, predominantly in Wales. He played for the Wales national side back in the late 90s. He's coached pro in Europe, predominantly Wales again. He's also the assistant coach for Team Russia for a few years, and he is now current head coach of Canada. And you probably saw him at the 2019 World Cup. He's got a good quote. Great all-around guy. He's doing some really cool things with the Canadian rugby team. He's got some great thoughts on how to make some improvements there. Fine gentleman to chat with a pretty good sense of humor. So Kingsley's coming up now. I was very excited to talk to him because, as I said, this is a passion of mine. I'm not getting paid. I'm just a teacher that has been fortunate enough to connect with some of these all these great athletes over the course of the last 6-8 months. What was supposed to be a small podcast about maritime rugby, maybe 6 to 10 pods a year has turned into, well, this is my 21st or 22nd pod, and they've all involved some form of a national player or coach. And it's been really exciting for me. And Kingsley's right at the top of the list because he heads our men's national team, and it's definitely a privilege to chat with him. So I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation. And so sit back, as always, crack a beer, and enjoy the chat. All right, and welcome back to the Canadian Ruck. It's Jamie here, and we're lucky and fortunate today to have Kingsley Jones, who's the head coach of Team Canada's national side. Kingsley, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we're going to jump right in. As many of you probably know, Kingsley was born and raised in Wales. He played and coached professionally in Europe for a number of years. Can you talk to us about the difference of rugby and the difference of the rugby culture with Wales or Europe and with Canada?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is, I guess, is our domestic game in Canada not being professional. You know, we got to remember we compete in probably the top 22, top 25 even sides in the world now have domestic professional leagues or semi-professional leagues. Thankfully, for the introduction of the MLR and the Toronto Arrows, that is a pathway for us. But that is a long way to go to be, compared to a top 14, pro 14 or super rugby team in terms of the number of staff, the amount of time, the facilities, the infrastructure that these super teams have. I was lucky enough to play, as you say, with some really good teams. The game went professional 95, 96, and I've been employed in the game since that moment continually, which I'm really proud of. It's one of my, I think it's a proud achievement to be able to do that and sustain that. The play inside, initially when the game went professional, we overdid things. We actually worked a lot harder than some of the professional programs now in terms of time commitment. And I remember in this invention, we were actually turning up for games pretty fatigued due to the volume of work we were doing during the week.
So what do you mean you were working harder?
Well, what we suddenly found was we had a lot of professional coaches. We'd have a scrum coach, a weightlifting coach, a S&C coach, a line-up coach, a defense coach, and the balance there of all those coaches fighting for time. And I think it was a new learning for them, and the players obviously bore the brunt of that. We could be training, particularly early in the week, going to work at 7:38 a.m. on a Monday and leave the club at 5 o'clock. And that would be the same Tuesday and maybe a half day on a Wednesday. And also the level of contact. I always remember the reason I probably retired, it wasn't Saturday that was getting to me any longer. It was the week. I couldn't deal with, full-on contact. And on the Tuesday, I played number 7. My body wasn't really well until Tuesday after a Saturday game. And it was in the days where, right now the guys are physical, the collisions in the game are huge. But what happened when I played is that your body was a carpet. I got playing number 7, I came off the field with a few stud marks, and so did every other loose forward. But so recovering just from that alone was a challenge in terms of bruises and bumps. But and often again on a Tuesday afternoon, if you had a squad like at Gloucester, there were times where the great Steve Ajomo, the blindside flanker for England, for example, those guys weren't getting games, and the list goes on. Some really good international players in the non-15, if you like. So Tuesday afternoon, they'd want to prove a point. It was often more difficult to play 30 minutes Tuesday afternoon than it was on a Saturday afternoon. So those are the types of learnings I think with the in terms of the professional environment and the daily training environment of how we train and prepare. So those were the bigger challenges. As I got through towards the end of 2003, the guys were getting bigger and bigger. I was an open side flanker that weighed about 98 kilograms. I remember playing against Sale Sharks for Gloucester, and we were in the shared showers after the game. And I looked around the shower room, and I was the smallest guy on the field, I think. And the Sale team, they had a backline of Jim Maunder, Barry John Mather, Steve Hanley, John Devereux, Adrian Hadley. These guys were all 6'2", 110 kilograms minimum, and they were the backline.
Yeah.
So, it started to take its toll on my body, to be honest with you, at that point. That I found that, I was very fortunate to go straight from professional player to coach. I spent a season at Doncaster, which was a lower level, championship level as a director of rugby. I tried to take so when you're a young coach, you have the benefit of all experience of just played the game, because the players have the understanding, they play the game. But of course, as a young coach, you don't really have the empathy, the teaching skills that you will have in, 15 years later. 15 years later, you hopefully have those skills, but you need to rely on the players because they are playing the game and they understand exactly how the game is moving and changing.
Right.
So the advantages of that, after 12 months of finishing there, I went to Doncaster. I was in Sale Sharks in a really good team with a lot of good players. And probably not many of the coaches at that level then had actually been professional players. They hadn't played in a professional era. So I always remember wanting to take those lessons from how it felt to be a player to the Sale Sharks team with Philippe Saint-André, who I played with at Gloucester. And he was the director of rugby. And we certainly didn't go hard at each other in training. We certainly tried to make it all focused to Saturday. And making sure that the guys were energized, and also ensuring that the guys really enjoyed the environment. Professional rugby in its invention, it became, as much as as amateurs, we all wanted to give all our time to the game. We practiced when we could and asked for time outside work. But we didn't want it to become like punching in and clocking off. And it did certainly come like that in some of the teams I played in. It was a slog. It was hard. And those are the learnings from that transition. And I think most environments have the same focus now. It's about Saturday, freshening up, making sure the boys are enjoying it and ready to go on the weekend.
Right. That makes sense. It's you don't want to be worn out and beaten up before you even get to the game, right?
Yeah. And to go back to your question, I think, the key learnings, the differences is that environment. Can you imagine how much your nutrition, your well-being, your sleep patterns. I mean, the detail that they go into now in these leagues or in, the top nations, it's pretty, a lot of science involved. So when you come into Canada and the environment we are, there's some really good players and some really good athletes, but ultimately, unless they are in a full-time training environment, learning the game every day, improving their skills every day, physicality alone, if we're not, and the other thing is, at the Dragons, we'd have an academy as more as the four regions do, and at Sale Sharks, but the kids would be outside with their mum, like you have guys have with hockey. If you're not prepared to turn up at 6 a.m., your mum won't take you at 6 a.m. when you're 15 years old, then someone else will take your spot.
Yeah.
And that's the same, where we'd have players, the younger players in that gym, 15-year-old, only learning the techniques of lifting. But the biggest thing that I remember in the S&C side that really struck me was by the time 2018, we had 18-year-old guys bench pressing 100 backs, bench pressing 130 kilograms.
Jeez.
Now, and that's because of their training age and the amount of time they've been exposed to it. If you're exposed to that sort of environment for 3 years, that's what you can get to. And, back in the day when we first transitioned, our props would be lucky to bench press, 150. And that was the big, strong guys. So that is the big challenge with us in Canada, is that having those guys in that daily training environment, being able to be physically ready as much as anything else. Great line, like I said about Sale, when I played against Sale, the bigger they are, the harder they hit you. And don't let anyone tell you any different, So we have to be physically, and we've got brave, tough guys. But unfortunately, the 50th, 60th minute, time will tell. The big guys keep running at you, and you have to be conditioned as well as those guys. So I think that's one of the biggest learnings for me, is our athletes not having that pathway and the opportunity to be in a daily training environment here in Canada. And then, we have got players overseas in those environments, which is brilliant, which is great. But of course, there was about 12 when I first took the job. But of those 12, there was only 2 or 3 regularly playing. And that it became an hindrance in itself, because we had guys then that are just there, going through the motions, carrying shields. And it's very tough mentally for those guys not to be playing and not to have something to work towards.
Right.
So our better players luckily got contracts, but didn't actually play enough. So those are the challenges and the differences really that I had to learn. Is biggest shock, I guess, in the comparison is our chance to get these guys in a daily training environment. And as I say, thanks to the Arrows, we can do that. And of course, the Pride program now, that we can, if we identify 17, 18-year-olds, let's get them into that Pride program to teach them how to be a professional sportsman, if nothing, and everything else that goes with it.
Right. No, that makes sense. You've got, like you said, in Wales, you'd have kids showing up for those 6 a.m.s, and here they do that for hockey, but not necessarily rugby. We start typically later age for rugby. There's some great athletes, but they might not be exposed to the game until they're in high school. And I mean, to look at the size of our country, it's, landscape-wise, we're huge. And try and find and bring all those players together is difficult, but hopefully the Pride and the Arrows Academy and stuff is a step in the right direction for Canada and for Canadian rugby. Absolutely. So what brought you to Canada to coach our national team? Like, what were some selling features of Team Canada?
Well, firstly, I have so much respect for the Canadian players that I played against and played with. I really respect Canada as a rugby nation as much as any of the teams that we regularly played against with Wales. I'm not going to say I'm saying that because I'm on a Canadian show. That's a fact, and I said that at the time I got the job. I'd been with the Dragons 4 years. The Welsh Rugby Union had taken it over, and it was a scenario of I change some of my values and stay with the Dragons, align with the Welsh Rugby Union, or maybe it was time for someone else under a new ownership. And the discussions I had with Martin Phillips, the chief executive of Welsh Rugby Union, were excellent. And he talked about me taking some time out of the frontline coaching and maybe supporting with Geraint John, who had been with Canada, working alongside him, supporting the age group programs and aligning the pathways, and also getting some self-development. Because as I said, I'd been in the frontline coaching non-stop. So I took that opportunity to work with the Welsh Rugby Union, and it was I was there for 2 or 3 months, and I was definitely going to take. Martin Phillips said to me, let's see where we are in 2 years' time and see what's next for me then, but let's take this time out to work with the union. And 3 months into it, I had a call from an agent actually and said, would I be interested in looking at a Canadian job? And I guess if it hadn't been a Six Nations team, then I don't think I would have changed what I was doing with the union. But Canada was really attractive. And also I will say that the opportunity for my family, I got three children here with me. I got 2 boys in Wales. I got a 12-year-old, 12 now, an 8-year-old and a 7-year-old. And the opportunity for us to come to a great country like this and have a life change was another big factor. And in fact, when I first spoke to the agent about the job, I didn't tell my wife for a week that I was talking to them, because I knew if I mentioned there might be an opportunity in Canada, I'd be gun against my head to go to Canada. So
she eventually came around.
Yeah, she I knew that they'd want to take this chance. It's a small world, and Lynn Jones, who I work with, had applied for the Canadian job 2 years before. And his wife was telling my wife how great Canada was, Vancouver Island, and they discussed it. So she had all this information about it. And of course, then talking to Alan Vance and Gareth Rees and different people, I knew that it was a big challenge, lots of big rocks. But I also know that there's a great rugby culture, there's a great rugby history in Canada, and a challenge. I've always wanted a challenge, and a challenge to qualify for a World Cup from difficult circumstances drew me to the job. And so and I knew, as I say, there was some good people. There's some good people involved. I know there's lots of things, some negative things around us challenges we have, but there are a lot of good things as well. A lot of positives here. University rugby is really good. There's some good people in the provinces. And as I say, there's a real rugby community here. I worked in Russia as well, and it had a professional domestic league, so to speak. So that was a bonus. But in terms of rugby culture. There was only small pockets, you know, and mostly fathers who played rugby. Their kids were rugby players. I had like 3 sets of brothers in one team at one point, all because their father were former internationals. So I knew that there were strong rugby clubs. I knew BC in itself, in terms of the island, there's good rugby teams. The same in Ontario. Anyway, I don't want to single anyone else out, but you know, Newfoundland. You look at the players that have come through there, and all those areas. So you know, I knew that there was a lot of potential, but I also knew there was big challenges, and both of those things drew me to the job.
So those challenges you talk about and potential, like when you come up with those obstacles in the direction you're trying to take the men's program in, like what are you doing to overcome those obstacles? Are you relying on people to help you through that? Like who's coming up with ideas to get through, get around the different obstacles you might face?
Well, I think everybody's collaborating, and I think probably, it's not for me to speak on this, but I mean, surely the fact that we had to go to the repechage and we were lucky to qualify for this Rugby World Cup, and you know, not just luck, because a lot of hard work went into it, but we don't want to find ourselves in a situation like that again. We're a top rugby country, and I think everybody, it was a sort of realization that we need to do more, and we can't just point the finger at any one person or any certain body. We're all responsible for the performance of the national team, and you can blame a coach or you can blame a chief exec, but that in reality, the reality is we all have a responsibility. And the biggest challenge, I believe, is a pathway. I think there's a lot of good young kids as compared to other countries I've worked in, you know, in England, in Wales, in Russia, 15, 16-year-olds. There's some really good young players. We just have to try and provide that pathway, which we're working on doing. I think Bill Webb and Yarrows have been instrumental. That was a piece that, you know, to get to the World Cup was one part of my challenge. The next one is, can we be competitive in the next one in 2027? And whether I'll be here then, we don't know that, but we need to try and set the tracks and lay down the foundations for that. And without a pathway, that's going to be a huge challenge for us without that. So it's a collaboration. All the provincial leads have been outstanding. We've spent a lot of time in this COVID situation here talking to the provincial leads, trying to align our programs, trying to align with the national team, trying to make it clear what the pathways are. We'll be putting some of that information out over the next few weeks, some of the stuff we've been doing. And I think it's all the support of all those people that will allow Canada to be back where they should be. And I think we should be top 16 in the world. I would sit here and say top 10, but I don't think that's fair to say that. That's making up things. But I certainly believe over the next couple of years we can get back to 16, and that pathway is critical to enable us to do that. So everyone's collaborated, Jamie, is the answer, to try and get us there. And the MLR introduction, having 7 players in Seattle, having 3 or 4 elsewhere, that is the lifeline for us. And the other big thing to mention as well is our window moving from our playing window, Reg 9, moving from February, March, April. We have an opportunity here to align the programs with the league. So we will be playing July, August, September. We'll be playing in November. That aligns with MLR. And that actually gives us a head start on other countries as well. This is what other countries are talking about now because of COVID. They're trying to have a perfect season.
Right.
Because one of the biggest challenge coaching international rugby is players coming in for 2 weeks, going back to their clubs for a month, coming back. It's a real challenge. But us in the USA, have a real opportunity here if we can align that. So the answer to the question is a collaboration of people trying to make sure we have a daily training environment and a clear pathway for the players to get to the top.
Absolutely. And the global alignment of the schedule, like you said, it's happening here in the Americas, but it would be interesting on the global scale, and you know, in Europe and South America, or sorry, in the Southern Hemisphere, if that takes to fruition as well. Like, I think it only makes sense to be able to have professional sides playing at the same time, because it can only do nothing but strengthen the international game when everybody's available. That's going to be highly frustrating as a coach when you're taking off for the series. Jersey over my shoulder is Cole Keith's from the Kenya game. He had everybody autograph it for me. But when you have, DTH is off playing somewhere, Tyler's off playing somewhere, and then they fly in for these 3 games, they haven't had a chance to prep. That's got to be a huge challenge on the coach and also on the players, getting used to those different guys coming in and out of the system, right?
Absolutely. You bang on. I mean, it's the biggest challenge for the players you feel sorry for. And other countries I see some articles about Uruguay, and Uruguay have done a wonderful job to get where they are. But let's remember, Uruguay is like Wales. I
Yeah,
can make a phone call and get every player in Wales in Cardiff, and they'll only have to travel an hour. You know, the cost of getting our players together without the logistical challenges is astronomical. So they're
absolutely.
huge challenges. So, and the other thing is, the other piece is our professional players, that are playing in Super Rugby and other competitions, top 14. They have a lot of pressure put on them when they want to go and play for their national team. So they want to go and play for their national team, but the club will say, "Hang on, why are you playing against Brazil in a non-meaningful game?" So they have pressure, and they're in a really awkward position. They have a chance of a short window to earn money, and then they want to play for their country. But if they play for their country, they have a choice to make between two: big contract or no contract and play for your country. And that is a real double-edged sword for our players. The other thing is that we want to try and create a Canadian way, and I guess we lose our identity. And it's not just Canada; it's a lot of the lower nation teams where we only see our players, World Cups. We get 4 weeks prep together. We got to start from scratch. Now we look at the best teams in the world. They'll play 10 to 12, 14 tests together in a year.
Yeah,
Now, we won't see many turnover of players. There'll be the same sort of 30 players, 25 players playing in those tests, and they are working together. They almost have a team within a team. Wales are doing so well, and a lot of it is down to Wales first. And they can also, the other thing we can't do is we can't have, other teams will have a 3-day camp. New Zealand, for example, there's a break in Super Rugby. They'll have a 3-day All Black camp. And then that 3 days, they can cover off their values, their culture, their game plan. They get them together, they disperse. So they can do that a number of times through the year. Same as Uruguay, same as other smaller countries. We can't do that, So those are the challenges. And as I say, it's the challenges for the players. They're the ones I feel for. And going back to what I was saying about the pressures of staying with the club during that window rather than going playing international rugby. We've had players at the World Cup that have played 18, 20 tests and played 3 World Cups.
yeah,
You can't create a team or a culture with that. It's proven that the teams that do successful in a World Cup have played thousands of tests together. Caps, sorry. They have thousands of caps between them. And that is critical. So they're the critical things we've identified. And not only that, the coaching as well. Are we in a position to employ full-time coaches for 4 years? Again, we have coaches coming in, parachuted in. It's difficult for those coaches. It's difficult for those players who have some coaches can't commit for a 4-year cycle. Well, for 4 years, for 10 weeks, 12 weeks work, it's very difficult for them. So those are some of the challenges that would bring. But if we went from end of June through to the middle of September, we'd be able to contract, keep our players together. We'd be able to build some culture, build some team. And then, of course, return in November. But that would give us really good alignment and a really good chance to grow and possibly catch up with those other teams that have more resource and higher level competition.
absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Some frustrating things to work through, but I think so far I've been impressed with how you handle the national side, and hopefully that continues to happen. Let's speak a little bit about, I guess, the performance of Canada. I thought we did well in Japan for the World Cup, and especially when you think of the obstacles that you just kind of highlighted. We had tough kick and tough go there with New Zealand off the hop. Probably the greatest team of the past 15 years. South Africa started slowly, but man, watching you guys turn it around in the second half was, I think everybody that loves rugby in Canada was just beaming with pride. Disappointing loss to Italy, and every player that I've talked to have all said that. And then unfortunately the Namibia game was canceled due to weather. As a coach, what did you do to get those guys prepared for each of those matches? You're going up against New Zealand. We're going up against South Africa. Those are, it's a pretty heady competition. How did you get them to regroup in that second half against South Africa? Like, what is your mindset that you're trying to lay out to the players against those massive squads?
I think, I guess the first thing was the motivation to play those teams. When you see the draw, it's a tough draw, but you look at it both ways. And I remember my experience in the last World Cup with Russia. We played Australia, Italy, USA, and I think an Ireland. And I think they're big teams, but I think the key for us, we played USA first in that World Cup, and I always had a feeling and sense that we were going to, that was a game we could win. It was first up. We targeted that game. We lost narrowly in that game. And then sort of 5 days later, we're playing against Italy. And from that, I learned that we talk about the first game too much. If you do that, you end up, it was all over. It was a sense of all over for us with Russia. And then we got to get up and play against the team, Italy. No disrespect, good team. We want to play Italy. But really, for me, there would have been more motivation for the players to play against South Africa or New Zealand. So when I saw our draw, I thought that was a real positive. Every player in the world would want to play against the All Blacks and the Springboks. That's got to be why you play the game. So I had no doubt that our players want to play in those games. Particularly DTH, and I think it was a big thing for him, and of course Tyler as well on a personal level, playing down there, and what a great opportunity for him to play against and show how good he is against his peers. So those weren't too concerning for me. And then Namibia being last, I'll be honest, I thought that was a great draw for us to have it in that order because it kept us alive, it kept us fighting to be in a good shape to play a game against Namibia where it's a team of the same level as us in the rankings, and we felt we would win. The Italy game was the disappointment. We talked about beating Italy for 12 weeks, and I felt that score could have been 32-20 or 35-25. I thought we just made basic errors. I won't say underperformed because there was so much good in the performance, but it didn't go to plan. I will say, and I'm not one to make excuses because we haven't said it before, but to lose Nick Blevins and Ben Lesage played that game with a broken hand, clean broken. And the boy didn't want to come off the field, by the way, for player welfare. He was almost fighting him to tell him he needed to come off. But that wasn't what we planned either. That was a bit of a shock. You need things to go really well for you when you want to win those games. You need the perfect day. You need their centres getting injured in the first 20 minutes rather than yours. So that was a disappointment. Boys felt that. The players felt they could have done better. But then going into that All Black game again, I thought the way we battled, as you said, we stuck to some of the strategy we had. Almost got a try. Unfortunately, it would have been a great try length of the field. We just got caught short. The most pleasing was the last 30 minutes, I felt, where we kept them scoreless or, for big periods in that game. And if you look at some of the other score lines, Wales in the third place game was 40-odd points to 10 or something. Yeah. And that could have been more. There was 2 points in that game where it was given a forward pass. When you think of how good Wales are, that's what the All Blacks can do. I think it was the lowest ever score against the All Blacks as well for Canada, which is a high score, but that was, it was always on our mind because we want to do better than the teams before us, and they've been great Canadian teams. So that our strategy was to never give up, keep going and enjoy the game and keep playing, and the boys did. The Springbok game was a real challenge, and I knew it would be. The thought of playing Namibia on our shortest turnaround after it was a challenge for us. South Africa are a team that can punish any team, which they showed. Obviously, they won the competition. There's areas of their game that are really tough to deal with in terms of maul, scrum, their physicality that they bring. Unfortunately, you're going to get injuries in test matches like that, especially the third one in a short space of time.
Yeah. So
it meant we had to rotate that squad. Our target was always to beat Namibia, so we had to put players in. And no disrespect to the players who went in, but it was a big step up for those guys, some of those guys. And, we got off to a bad start. But South Africa, when you watch the game back, they were pretty good. They were pretty hot. And, they took every opportunity that came their way. We did make mistakes defensively early on as well, which gave them opportunities. But the biggest thing, against the two teams we're talking about, they get an opportunity, they take it. And that's what top class is about. And they took their opportunities, every one they created, fair play to them. So the red card then, obviously, is what you're alluding to. That was a big blow for us, 30 minutes to go down to 14 players. Plus, it was a lock. Plus, I had planned to take Tyler Ardron off at half-time because we had the Namibia game. So to answer your question, what did we do? There was a heck of a lot going on and a real tough strategy. A lot around what are we going to do in the second half with our set pieces and our lineouts to secure possession, to be competitive still. We didn't want to be negative and just but also to control the ball better. We didn't control the ball at all in the first 20 minutes. They had 90% possession for 25 minutes. Well, any team that has of that quality has 90% possession, you're under the pump. So we wanted to control the ball either way. And then, of course, so we had to find a solution for the short. We went to 4-man lineouts, and our lineout percentage went through the roof. Unfortunately, they're not great to play attacking rugby off, but we were successful with our strategy. And then it was down to how are we going to manage the rest of the group with the Namibia game in mind. I know people might think, well, hang on, you're still in a game at that point. We are. But our success in our World Cup really, for me, would be measured on that Namibia victory and winning a game at the World Cup, which was a target for us. So those were the challenges we faced. Half-time in the change room, the players were great. They said all the right thing. The leaders said the right things. And we just talked about, basically, we got hammered in the first half of that game for 40 minutes. What have we taken from that 40 minutes? And how can we fare in the next 40 minutes? It's basically, let's don't wait till tomorrow to have a look at it and start again. Let's start again now. And let's go out and start again, 0-0. What can we do in the second half? What's the score going to be in the second half? And we broke it down to that. And I think the second half score was, I think we lost by about 5 points. So
it was like a 1-try difference, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a success. But obviously we know that the Springboks had got their bonus point and had done their task. We take that. But
they didn't quit. No, they were still coming hard.
And the crazy thing I remember about it was you want teams often, you play at the level we're at, and you want teams to bring their bench on, but you didn't want the Springboks bringing their bench on because you would argue that their bench was as strong as the starting team. Malcolm Marks coming off the bench and Klitschko and all these guys, and you're like, whoa, this is tough. So, but full respect to the Springboks. I thought Rassie Erasmus did a great job. I think he's a fantastic coach.
Absolutely.
And I actually said that before the World Cup, not to should be down the betting office, not allowed to do that. But I thought, no, I always fancied the Springboks to if there was someone who was going to be a surprise, it would be them. And I saw Rassie with Munster in Ireland, and he did a fantastic job. So, it was a privilege to play against them, but we want to compete better. We just don't want to take part. So those are the things for us going forward. And I can't explain the disappointment of the Namibia game being cancelled. It was pretty hard to take, to be honest with you. It was something we'd, on a personal level as well, and team level and staff, for 11 months, we'd looked at trying to win that game. I'm sure if you talk to Namibia, they felt the same, that they could have won that game too. But it was certainly a huge disappointment. I think it was tough to get over, actually, on a personal level for a few weeks. Really, really real blow that morning. But obviously there were bigger things at stake. The typhoon itself caused, problems, and there was more to rugby, more to life than rugby that day. So we took it on the chin and made the best of the situation.
I think that's fair. I think it's it does suck when things get changed. COVID's canceled so many different sporting events, high school sports and minor hockey and everything. I coach high school rugby, and we were going to have a really stellar team this year and challenge for a provincial title. And we didn't even get to touch a rugby ball this year because March break rolls around and we're not back in school after that. I mean, it's, apples to oranges, but, World Cup feeling when you have that team that, everybody's banking on, that you can key off that and get the win. But I think you guys did a great job of holding your heads high. And I think I saw some images of like community efforts that you had the players and coaches that helping out. And I think that's something that doesn't happen in other sporting cultures. Rugby players and rugby mentality and rugby communities seem to like gravitate to helping other people. So, hats off to you guys for, even in that adversity where we can't play and how disappointed you are, that you were able to come together and do something good for the communities over there in Japan. So that was real feather in the cap of Canadian rugby, absolutely, for sure. So the next section is a quick fire. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you just to kind of answer as quickly as you can. The first few, maybe answer as a player if you'd like, or you can designate if you think it's, as a player's personality or as a coach's personality. And most of them are about just Kingsley as a personality, and we'll see what we dig up here. So we'll start with the first one. Best team you ever faced?
Springboks as a player and a coach.
Okay. Best player you ever faced?
Abdelatif Benazi, France,
When was that?
possibly.
When was that?
For Argentina, 95, 96. For France, 96, 98.
Okay.
He's the team manager, I believe, at Montpellier now. He's incredible. Number 8.
All right. Toughest player you ever faced?
Possibly Lawrence Delalio. He was quite tough. He wasn't known for being tough, but Lawrence was always tough, never get back an inch.
All right. What's your greatest memory as a player?
Captain in Gloucester and leading them out in front of the shed every home game.
That would be pretty cool. All right. Chips or chocolate?
Chocolate.
What light, dark, or white?
Milk. I'm a bit boring though. I don't eat carbs, so there's no answer with the chips.
All right.
I
So
don't eat chocolate either, but I would certainly eat chocolate over chips.
all right. So the next one you might not answer then. French fries or poutine?
Neither, unfortunately. I'd have to go without.
All right. What's your favorite beer?
Boring. Don't drink. I do apologize. I would have a glass of wine. There we
All
are.
right. Glass wine. All right. What's a guilty pleasure then?
Guilty pleasure is riding my motorbike.
What do you have for a bike?
I have Honda VT 1100 and I have a Husserberg 300 two-stroke enduro bike.
So do you go solo or do you take your wife with you?
Since we've had the kids, the wife won't get on the back of the bike. It's too risky.
All right. You don't drink, but you've been part of festivities. What would be the best place that you can remember for a post-match beer? Like a celebration afterwards, rugby camaraderie stuff.
Well, I'll be honest. I think the golden moment after a rugby match is in the changing room with your teammates, waiting to do recovery. If you got a couple of beers in the changing shed after a good win, and I would be the last out of the changing room because I really enjoyed that being in that changing room with just the players, just your teammates, and having a beer there.
Yeah, absolutely. What TV series are you binge watching right now?
The Last Dance, if that's a TV series.
That works. How far into it are you?
I just watched episode 10 yesterday,
Nice.
so I've watched it all.
He is the GOAT. What's your favorite movie?
Oh, The Green Mile.
Oh, The Green Mile. Okay, interesting. Who would play you in the Netflix movie of your life?
Oh, it's got to be, what's his name, isn't there? The
Sean
James
Connery?
character.
Sean Connery?
Oh, the other one. Who's the new one?
Daniel Craig?
Daniel Craig. Look, I look like him from behind.
From behind.
We got the same shaped ears.
Oh, who would play the leading lady?
Oh, good questions. My wife, of course.
Very good. Very smart. All right, last one. Who had the biggest impact on you as a coach?
A guy called Mostyn Richards, probably, who was the head of the Welsh Rugby Union development. He coached the backs with me at Abu Vale, and then he was the guy that put me on the coaching pathway. Then sort of pushed me into coaching, even when I was playing at 25. I did level 1, 2, 3, etc., all through him, and he's still a mentor. But it'd be remiss not to mention Kevin Bowring and a few others as well, Graham Henry. I've been very lucky and my father was an international coach as well. So they are the people the coaches that really influenced me.
That's great. Some good names there. All right, so I got to just get a few questions left. How important is it to you to build relationships with your players, your coaching staff? So as a coach, what's the significance of relationships for you and your teams?
Yeah, they're critical, aren't they? Certainly with the staff. I think leadership is about doing the right things and leading with your actions and general behaviours. Try to create a culture. It comes from yourself. Nobody likes a hypocrite. So I think sharing as well, making sure that everybody feels involved and as had they say. I think that's really important. I think it's important that people are able to come in, enjoy themselves and express themselves. Certainly your staff, they need to be empowered. You need to trust them. And, if you want to influence those people, which obviously is my job really, to influence them, to try and get them us on the same page, you need a logical explanation for the reason, for why you're doing things. I think if you have honesty, you build trust, and then you can. But you need shared experiences as well. You need time together. I think that's the biggest challenge, as we alluded to earlier on. If you only go 3 weeks with a group, it's very difficult for them to totally trust you. Anyone in life, once you've been through seasons of shared experiences, defeats together, victories together, tough times, then you build that trust. So I think the more time we can spend together, then I think you're in a really good place then. But it doesn't happen overnight.
It's hard to build a relationship with just a few short weeks leading up to a World Cup or any event, right? So that's
especially with
challenging.
50 people.
So you mentioned team culture too. So what is the impact of team culture on a great team? Like, who drives the bus for team culture? Is that the players driving it? Is it like at the national level? Is it the coach kind of saying, this is what I would like to do, and let's have the leaders buy on? Or do you give it over to the players? How does the team culture work for you with Team Canada?
Well, it's a good question. I think that the coach holds the power, but the coach has to have the confidence to give that power away. And I think that, empowerment is about empowering the right people. And if you do that, then you're on the right page. But it's also having agreed values, and then holding those, and then bringing those values to life, and having an agree, with you can measure whether we live in those values then, and whether we're actually acting them out. And if someone is going outside of those values in a selfish way, if we've agreed those values at the start, then we can always bring it back to what's best for the team that we've agreed. So it's not about what I've decided; it's about what we've agreed. But I think, along that way, hopefully you have the right people in the room and all your values align. And then, as I say, you make sure you bring them to life and you measure them daily.
So that's a nice little segue into the next question. The impact of great team players, is the emphasis more on character over skill, or skill over character?
Well, certainly character is critical in a team sport. That person really, you often find with the most competitive people that they're intrinsically selfish, which is fine because they're athletes and they're driven. But ideally, in our sport, being selfless is a key characteristic, but also humility. So humility is a really important factor. And I think, at the level we're at, talent, it has to be there, and talent will be there. They are talented people. And then does it come down to the person? Well, if you've got too many of the wrong people in your group, it'll be detrimental to the team and what we're trying to achieve. So I would say that 70% of it is down to the person. And it's no coincidence of all the best environments I've been into, hard work, desire, those characteristics. You could have people talk about talent, and people are talented, but is it nature, is it nurture? And a lot of it is down to hard work. As in with the Bulls, Victor Matfield, Mornay Stain, Fourie Dupree, first to train and last to leave. And Victor at that time, those are the characteristics that I see. I can reel off a dozen of those name drops if you wanted, but those characteristics are the best players. It's no coincidence. They are the hardest working players, and they often have the most talent. So there's a correlation.
Absolutely. One of the things that Connor Trainer and I chatted about, and I read up a lot on the All Blacks and their culture of no assholes, and Connor kind of mentioned that as well. And I think when I think of character, yeah, you can definitely be, as you said, a little bit selfish because you're trying to be better, but you also need to be humble. But it's just the getting rid of the asshole culture that helps your team kind of I guess move along a little bit better. I think was he was alluding to, and that's kind of how I look at it as well. So hard work, desire, all of that definitely plays a factor in your team succeeding. Last question. Talk to us about the importance of having a positive coach who is knowledgeable yet also a very good communicator.
Well, I think being positive is about having an open mind, and there's a lot of things in life. I know that if you have someone who keeps saying we can't do this and we won't do this, things will never happen. If you say we can do this and we are going to do this, there's a very good chance that it will happen. And I think that has to be the influence you display. Coaching the Dragons was a challenge with a very young team and a very small budget, and we would be very close in lots of games. And the players, we were getting a pint and a half out of a pint glass, but we would still narrowly lose to some quality teams. Leinster, the best team in Europe, we'd lose narrowly. And I always think, that job was a tough job for 42 weeks of the year. You play Leinster away, you lose by 5. You come back on a Sunday and you've got to get up on Monday in front of the group and tell them, and you've got to believe it because they will work it out, that we are going to beat Munster this Friday, another top team in Europe. And if I stand up in front of that group and don't believe it myself, they will know. And that was a challenge. I'd often spend all day on a Sunday convincing myself how we can beat this team, and we are going to beat this team. And there's an example, I suppose, of being positive approach going into it. And I think, often you've got to take away the restrictions. And in a situation where we are with Canada playing against the All Blacks, for example, the way you look at it is, what have we got to lose? We ain't got anything to lose. The restrictions and the negativity comes under pressure in the tight games where you're supposed to win. Where you're talking about, if we don't do this, they'll do this, and if we don't do that, and it's just framing your words totally differently about what we can do. So I also believe, a lot of teams talk about we only allow positive talk. Well, there needs to be sometimes some talk of reality of what can happen if of an outcome. But certainly the mindset coming from the top to the other coaches, and also focusing on your processes as well, just being positive with us. I know also a lot of teams, some teams, will focus too much on the opposition. When ultimately we focus on ourselves and we be positive about how we are going to play the game. And the last thing on it is creating a positive environment. Positive coaching for me is having a positive environment, keeping it fresh, keeping it interesting, bringing the players in, having fun.
Absolutely. I like that thought about the focus on your own team. You can't control what the other team's doing. You can only control what you're doing or yourself on the pitch and in training. So keeping that focus.
I think often teams can lose their identity. You spend week to week looking at other teams and what are they good at? And what are you good at? Yeah. What are you really good at? And talk about positivity again is coming through there. That's what I'd rather talk about, is what we're really good at. Now, you're naive not to think that a certain team does certain things, and you've got to be prepared for it. But how much time do you spend focusing on that instead of focusing on what you're good at and Absolutely. What you can do?
100%. That makes total sense. Any last thoughts for what you would like our listeners to know about Kingsley Jones, the coach or person?
Well, not really. I mean, last thoughts are my family love Canada. We love being here. It was a big sacrifice, if I'm honest. The first 12 months of this job, I was probably with the team for 9 months out of the 12 months being away from the family due to tours, commitments, repechage, etc. And it was a big sacrifice, but one that's been worth it. Particularly during this period now, chance to align with the provincial leads. I think there's some really good people in those roles across Canada. Chance to align with our age groups. So I'm hoping to be more visible in the next 12 months and be able to do other things. Obviously, due to our test match window moving, it allows us more time to get out there and to meet different people and to share. So, no, I think we have to have a balance going into 2023 of bringing some young players through and those players hopefully will go through to 2027. But obviously we face a huge challenge next year when we have to qualify in 2021. So that's the start of that process. That's going to be our toughest challenge coming up. I think we get through that, which we will. I think with the MLR getting stronger all the time, I think by the time we get to 2027, we'll be a really competitive team. And along the way in 2023 as well, we have to be realistic. We need to be at that World Cup and be more competitive than we were at this one.
I know I speak for many Atlantic Canadians that we love what you're doing, and that we were all very heartbroken when that match against Italy was off the docket in Nova Scotia for July, because it would have been a packed stadium, absolutely, for sure. Anyway, thank you very much, Kingsley. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the Canadian Ruck Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for your time, and good luck.
So thanks again for listening. That was Kingsley Jones, head coach of Team Canada. Thanks very much for joining us, Kingsley. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Great coach, done some, going to do some great things with Canada. You've already started the process. We really appreciate that as Canadian rugby fans. And all around, great guy. Kingsley and I chatted for about 10 minutes before we recorded, and probably another 30 or 40 minutes afterwards. And it was just great to sit and chat with a very knowledgeable coach. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, Kingsley, and letting our listeners hear your story. Coming up soon, next pod, it should be Doug Fraser, followed by, we've got a couple other calls on the go. We got Jamie Cudmore, who's coaching the Pacific Pride now. Adam Kleberger, if you remember, played in that 2011 World Cup back in New Zealand. He had the massive beard, and it sparked a bit of a trend. And we also have dynamic Phil Mack will be joining us shortly as well. As always, want to say massive thank you and a big shout out to all the essentials workers and support staff and volunteers, everybody else that has been focusing on these tough times of COVID-19. I'd like to give a shout out to my teacher friends, myself included, but all the teachers that have gone back to work just this week, and hopefully you can all stay safe and continue doing great things with your students. As always, I'd like to say thanks to Ben Sound Music for supplying with us with our tunes. And as always, feel free to drop me a line, request a topic, future guest, maybe questions asked some guests. You know who's coming up. If you want to hear anything specific about them, please let me know and I can throw it into the question, into the dialogue. And as always, until next time, this is Jamie. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and keep on rocking.